All right, welcome to the Cwic Media Come Follow Me series. We are covering the Book of Joshua. I want to cover a little bit about Joshua himself here, and then we're going to bring Joseph back into the mix here, Joseph of Egypt, who really there's a very strong connection here between Joshua and Joseph. So let's start here in chapter 1 of the Book of Joshua. And you see here in verse 1, now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan. That's your job, Joshua, to go over the Jordan. Thou and all this people until the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Okay. Now, we need to consider who Joshua is. Joshua is an Ephraimite. And, not a Levite. He's not of Moses' tribe. He's not of Aaron's tribe. He's an Ephraimite. And would seem to already have some political faith cachet, so to speak, from the line that he's in. So he could be a direct descendant of Ephraim. And remember how important that is. Again, I've talked about this a lot, but that power play between Joseph, right, the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, and then Judah become, a very big rivalry as Israel splits down the road. The kings of the northern kingdom of Israel are Ephraimites. Now, I've interviewed, if you may have seen that episode that I did previously with the author and scholar Don Bradley from his 116 pages, the Lost 116 Pages book, fascinating book. He goes over a scenario where Joshua is the direct descendant of Ephraim, and that the sword that he wields originally against the Amalekites as the children of Israel come out of Egypt, and before they get to Sinai, right, in that first big battle, and then coming in here through the land of Canaan, where he is leading the wars with his sword, that sword could be the sword of Joseph originally, forged by Joseph, and then brought, given to Joshua in that succession, in that line, that Ephraimite line of an heir, so to speak. And that sword would continue to go down a line that would end up being in the hands of another Ephraimite in the time of Lehi. And that Ephraimite possibly would be Laban. And so the sword which he carried, that Nephi felt he needed to keep with him, could be the sword of Joseph and Joshua. Now, is there any evidence for that? Well, not directly. But there is a man named, I'm trying to remember his name, his last name is Bishop, I remember that, who had spoken with Martin Harris. And Martin Harris, remember, was the scribe of the 116 pages that were lost. He was the scribe for Joseph. And so he not only had the time there to go through the manuscript as Joseph was translating the plates, but he also had the 116 pages with him traveling from Pennsylvania up to New York. He had plenty of time to read through all of this and to see what was in there. Well, according to Bishop, Martin Harris said that the sword of Laban was the sword of Joshua and Joseph. That's pretty fascinating. And would therefore represent the new heirs, even though they're from Manasseh, that would be carrying the sword with them to the new promised land. Just as Joshua used the sword to conquer the promised land of Canaan, Nephi would be bringing that sword with him to the new promised land. And of course, it represents his people. It's from Joseph. And also, according to those 116 pages, or according to Martin Harris, Laban was an Ephraimite, and Ishmael was an Ephraimite. And remember that the sons of Ishmael were already married when the sons of Lehi went back to get Ishmael. And then he also had some daughters who would have been Ishmaelites. And so that group that would have, not Ishmaelites, what am I saying? That would have been Ephraimites. They're later called Ishmaelites as one of the tribes of the Lehites. But they were also from Ephraim, according to Bishop and others who had spoken to or interviewed Martin Harris. So the group that leaves from Jerusalem and travels through the desert and the wilderness and builds the ship and comes across the waters to the Americas is a mix of not just Manasseh, but of Ephraim as well, accordingly. So that's something pretty important. And Joshua is tied directly to Joseph. We're going to go over to that at the very end of the book of Joshua. I love the message here. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so will I be with thee. This is the moving of the mantle over to Joshua. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Be strong and of good courage. It's a good message, and I think that's the message to all of us. Be strong. That's we have to do that ourselves, and of good courage. We have reason for that. We have faith. We should have faith, and therefore we would have a hope, right? We should be strong and of good courage. Now, here in chapter 2, you have the spies that are sent out to Jericho. Now, Jericho is on the west side of the Jordan. So before they bring all of the Israelites across the Jordan River, they're going to spy out Jericho, because if they don't do this, they could be sitting ducks coming across the Jordan. So this is a smart thing to do. So they send the spies out to Jericho, and they end up at a harlot's house named Rahab. Now think about this. Why would they go there? Why would they go to a harlot's house? Well, what is the harlot's house? Well, in some translations, you have this as an inn, and that would make sense. That's oftentimes, anciently, that's how that would work. You would have a house of prostitution that was also an inn. And this is the very best place you could go if you were spying out a city. Why? Well, a couple reasons. First, you could see who is coming in and out of that place. Who is staying there? You're going to have foreigners. You're going to have a lot of soldiers that are there. And so you might be able to spot someone or talk to someone or get a feel for something. But more importantly, the women that are here are going to know an awful lot. They may know more than any intelligence group of people that the king or tribal leader of Jericho would have. They probably know more because they have these men coming in and staying there and then leaving, right? And so they can probably get a little bit of information out of them. So this was a smart place to go to try and get the information that they need. What is the state of Jericho at this time? What is the feeling there of the Israelites? They know about the Israelites. So what can we learn from them? Well, Rahab is going to know an awful lot about this. She says in verse 9 here, and she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land. She already knows this. And that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. So they know what's going on from her. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Egypt, and how and what ye did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan. So this is on the side that the children of Israel are still on. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. Okay, this is what they want to hear. This is going to give them that much more courage. But she says to them, I pray you swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that ye will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token. So others come looking for them. The spies have probably been looking around, asking questions. She lets them out. She hides them and lets them out down by a cord through the window. And off they go. And the spies bring back the message, and it's like to Joshua, and it's like, okay, it's go time. Here we go. We're going to move our millions across the river. How is this going to work? Well, it's going to work the same way that it worked for Moses, just as it was with Moses, so it will be with Joshua. So Joshua then is going to lead them across. He sends the priests across first, and they bring the Ark of the Covenant with them. And as they go into the water, the Lord stops the water upstream. He blocks the water. And there's no more river for them to cross. It's just a river bed. And so the millions end up crossing over the Jordan. And this is how I would look at this. I'm moving over to chapter 4 here in the summary here. It says, Joshua places 12 stones to commemorate the crossing of the Jordan. This should be on the other side. And after the priest bearing the ark pass over, the river returns to its course. So, you know how we've talked about karat barit, right? Which is the cutting of a covenant. The Israelites and the Jews don't make a covenant, they cut a covenant. And that is the two sides of covenant. You cut it and you separate them. Think of us and our Heavenly Father. And then it's a matter of bringing those two things back together, which is bringing two things that had been together now into one, at one-ment, or covenant, covenire, which is to come together. So that is a representation of a covenant to the Israelites. It's like baptism is a covenant with water. And you see them going through this, you can almost let's call it a veil of water to begin the process going through the wilderness 40 or 42 years earlier, and then coming into the promised land through a veil of water. So the splitting apart of the water on both ends of the wilderness, and then the bringing back together again. So they go to Jericho, and the Lord says to Joshua, see, I have given into thine hand Jericho and the king thereof and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets and ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow with the trumpets. Then you have in 16, and it came to pass at the 7th time, on the 7th day, when the priest blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Now you can imagine here, I don't know exactly what's happening here with the walls of Jericho. You know, Joshua heard the Battle of Jericho, right? But this would be loud. This would be loud. You probably have several million. If these numbers are correct here in the Bible, you would have several million people shouting at this point around the city walls. It says, and the city shall be accursed, even it and all that are therein, to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all that are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. By the way, there are some writings from the rabbis that have Rahab actually marrying Joshua. And they end up together. We don't know if that's true or not, but there are some rabbis that had written that as, let's call it part of Jewish legend. In verse 20, so the people shouted when the priest blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they destroy everything. Again, things are very brutal in the Old Testament. It's hard for us to understand this. Are we reading this properly? Is it, it's a cultural divide. It's a very strong cultural divide. Now, in chapter 8, I just want to briefly go over this because I'm going to do a separate episode specifically on this. When they get into the land a little bit further, they're going to go to the area of Shechem. And Shechem has two mountains. There is Mount Gerizim and there is Mount Ebal. And these two mountains, between them, there is a big covenant that is made. If you read through the book of Joshua, you'll see it's written very much in covenantal language. You'll see our term this day very often, right? That tells you that almost always that you're talking about a covenant that is taking place. But look what it says here in the summary. Joshua uses an ambush, takes Ai, and slays its inhabitants. He builds an altar in Mount Ebal. The words of the law, both blessings and cursings, are read to the people. Let me go down. I just want to dip in here a little bit. I'm not going to do much here, but Joshua, in verse 30, then Joshua built an altar unto the Lord of the God, Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal. Okay, that's the side of the cursings. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded the children of Israel. This is back in Deuteronomy 27. Moses said that this needed to be done when the children came into the land of promise, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, Deuteronomy 7. An altar of whole stones over which no man hath lift up any iron. So no hewn stones. And they offered thereon burnt offerings unto the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. And he wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of the law. Well, how do you do that? You plaster it, right? See, the mountains there are made mostly of limestone. And so you take the limestone and you cover the stones with the limestone, and then you make the inscriptions on the limestone. It's like plaster. And you get more covenantal language. There's a separation of the tribes. You have half the tribes go over toward Gerizim, Mount Gerizim, and half the tribes go over toward Mount Ebal. And you have two sides of something, again, like a covenant. You have the cursings at Mount Ebal are given, and then you have the blessings, right, that are given on the other side with Mount Gerizim. It's the two sides. It's just like anything that is given to you with the Word of God. You have your own choices. And if you follow the Word, or they're making a covenant here, right, they're split, karat berit. On one side are the curses with that covenant. If you don't follow the covenant, then you have the consequences of that. And if you do follow the covenants, then you have the blessings that come from that. Now, I'm going to do in the next day or two here, I hope, keep my fingers crossed, knock on wood, an episode that is about Joshua's altar. This is fascinating. Joshua's altar was found in the early 80s. And it's pretty amazing what they have found there. But just recently, in the last year, there was an additional find there at the altar of Joshua. I went to a presentation just last week given by an Israeli who is involved with that, pretty heavily involved with the altar of Joshua. And it's involved with the new find. And it's fascinating. It really does, if it's all true, and it looks like it is, it provides maybe the only, let's just call it the first, real evidence of the Exodus. That's one of the big things that biblical scholars talk a lot about right now, right? There's no real evidence for the Exodus. This would provide evidence, some pretty good evidence for the Exodus. All right, now, before we go to the last chapter of Joshua in Joshua 24, I want to go to Genesis 50. Why go to Genesis 50? This is the last chapter of the book of Genesis. It's what ends the book of Genesis. Well, the reason is because what we're going to end up with are two bookends. The end of Genesis, the closing of Genesis is one bookend. The closing of the book of Joshua is the other. Here's what the bookends are. Here in verse 22, sorry. This is in Genesis 50:22. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt. This is Joseph of Egypt. He and his father's house. And Joseph lived 110 years. Okay? The Jews even today are very much into numerology. Very, very much into numerology. Now we start to get a bit of a lineage here, right? So now we have in 23, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. So we get a little bit of the lineage that's starting to happen here. 3 different generations under Ephraim. So Joseph says in 24, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So he's prophesying here again, saying this will happen. You're going to be delivered into the promised land. Well, who does that? It's Joshua. Joshua is the one who does that. And who is Joshua? Joshua is a descendant of Joseph. Perhaps, again, a direct descendant coming down from these 3 generations here of Ephraim, and maybe an heir. He's someone with some major clout. So Joseph makes the promise. So what does that mean then? Well, let's just move on here. 25, and Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel. That is, that of all the children of Israel, not just his tribes, not just his sons, but of all the children of Israel, they had to promise to him, the oath here, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. All right, so this has to do with you being delivered into the promised land. 26, so Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And the bones of Joseph were carried along with, in a sense, kind of like a second ark. You had the Ark of the Covenant that was carried before them. Well, you also had the coffin, the ark that carried Joseph's bones, so to speak, in the coffin that was leading them as well, that they carried to the promised land with them. He was the leader that brought the children of Israel, the Israelites, the first Jacob's family, into Egypt. Joshua is the one that brings the children of Israel into the promised land. Now, let's go to the end of the book of Joshua to get the other bookend here from this chapter. Joshua chapter 24. Starts talking about how I sent Moses. This is the Lord. I sent Moses, also Aaron. I plagued Egypt. I brought your fathers out of Egypt. It's building up here. The Amorites and others on the other side of the Jordan, I gave them into your hand. I sent and called Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. You fought over the Jordan. You fought against the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Those are 7. One thing in verse 12, I think we get a different word here, but think about this. And I sent the hornet before you, which drave them out from before you, even the 2 kings of the Amorites, but not with thy sword, nor with thy bow. That's kind of interesting because we get this mentioned several times. Where else do we have a hornet or bees that are sent before a group of the Lord? Well, it's the Jaredites, right? As they travel, those bees are called Deseret. And then 13, I've given you a land for which he did not labor. That is showing for the promised land this is all me. This is my oath. This comes from me. And then 15, the famous verse here. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day. There's our covenantal language. Choose you this day whom ye will serve. This is ritual here. This is covenant. Whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And then you have, just like you would have in a covenantal situation. We get this with King Benjamin also. And the people answered, they might as well say with one voice here, and said, God forbid that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God, he it is that brought us up and our fathers out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, and which did those great signs in our sight, and preserved us in all the way wherein we went, and among all the people through whom we passed. Okay? Covenant here is what is happening. Now, we get down here to verse 29. And it came to pass after these things, this is after the covenant is made, that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died. How old? Being 110 years old, just like Joseph. The same thing on the back end here. It's like a chiasmus. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Serah, which is in Mount Ephraim. And verse 32, what gets coupled with this? And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried they in Shechem, in a parcel of ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and it became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. So there's our two bookends, the end of Genesis and then coming all the way here to Joshua. Joseph, again, brings the Israelites into Egypt. Joshua brings them into the promised land. But Joshua, very closely here as an Ephraimite, is tied together with Joseph. Imagine the legacy that means to the Nephites, right? And the Lamanites, for that matter, starting off. Imagine what that means to them. If the sword of Laban is the sword of Joshua and of Joseph, imagine how that ties things together for them. I'll talk to you next time.